Welcome to a briefing on the economic future of Minnesota, brought to you by Minnesota's credit unions. I'm Blaise Olson from Fluence Media and WCCO Radio. April is Financial Wellbeing Month, and Minnesota credit unions are leading the way to build financial awareness and opportunity, especially amongst newer and growing populations in the state. Joining me for this first segment is President and CEO of Minnesota Credit Union Network, Mark Cummins. Mark, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure to be here, Blaise. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about the things that credit unions are doing to build economic equity throughout the state of Minnesota.
We talk about economic equity, and one of the key parts of that is Minnesota's changing demographics. I know that credit unions are community-based and do a lot to make sure that they reflect the communities they're in. Can you talk a little bit about how Minnesota Credit Union Network and our member credit unions are looking at Minnesota's changing demographics in the way they provide some services?
Yeah, Blaise, and you're absolutely right. Credit unions are really of, from, and for the communities that they exist in. And so as we know and we can see in our own communities, the population and the demographics are changing. There is a definitive shift that we are seeing of a variety of demographics that are changing. And so we commissioned a study with Coopera Consulting, who you're going to hear from after a little while here, about those things, about what those changing demographics look like, where they are, what are the different stratifications within there, then also what are the opportunities for us to help those communities become more mainstream in their financial needs. What are those needs, and how can we address them in a way that is receivable to those communities? Because they are different than perhaps what we think of as a mainstream financial institutions. And so we need to prepare for that. We know that things are changing. And I think when we get into the study later on, you'll really see what's happening with that and how we can make a difference for people.
Mark, I think that's interesting is that you actually studied the changing demographics and what their financial services needs are, how they engage with financial institutions, what kind of products and services they need. And Minnesota credit unions, your member credit unions, we're going to hear from them as well about programs and initiatives they already have in place. Can you discuss kind of how your member credit unions have looked at these opportunities?
Absolutely.
Whether it's about members or employees?
So there's a variety of issues. Certainly, one of those things is that in many of these communities, there's a mistrust of financial institutions because of what they've experienced in their host countries that they've immigrated from. And so that's a barrier to be dealt with. Also, just like anybody else, we like to do business with people that look like us, that talk like us. And so there's that opportunity to learn about that, employment opportunities within credit unions for helping these communities. But I think it really starts with the base of what you mentioned at the beginning, Blaise. So the question really is the desire of our credit unions to reach out, to learn, to have interactions with the community, to discover what those needs are and how we can best address them.
Well, Mark, thanks for joining me. I know we'll have some very rich content and informative news here, hearing from Minnesota's credit unions. But thanks to Minnesota's Credit Union Network for leading this discussion in April, which is Financial Wellbeing Month.
It's Financial Wellbeing Month, and we like to say financial well-being for all. And that's really, I think, the topic of the day, of how we can reach out for everybody. So, Blaise, thanks for the opportunity. I always appreciate the chance to talk with you.
Of course, Mark Cummins, President and CEO of the Minnesota Credit Union Network. When we come back, we're going to talk to Jennifer Esperanza and Victor Coro of Coopera about the study they did on Minnesota's growing population, the changing demographics, and what it means for financial well-being and financial services in Minnesota. I'm Blaise Olson, and this is a briefing on equity in financial services brought to you by Minnesota Credit Union Network. Welcome back. I'm Blaise Olson, and this is a briefing on financial well-being, being in the month of April, presented by Minnesota Credit Unions. The next segment is from Coopera. Coopera is a organization leader in multicultural outreach for credit unions, and they commissioned a study with Minnesota credit unions on the future of Minnesota financial services needs with the changing demographics in Minnesota. Joining me now is Jennifer Esperanza and Victor Cora, and they're going to present the findings of the study in Minnesota for about 15 minutes, and then I'm going to have some follow-up questions. Jennifer and Victor, please share those findings now.
Well, good morning, everyone, and then thank you for the invitation. I'm Victor Coro, CEO of Coopera Consulting, and we're actually owned by the Iowa Credit Union League. We have partnered with the Minnesota Credit Union Network, quite a while now, and we're very pleased to be invited to talk with you or chat with you in April because it's Financial Wellbeing Month. In terms of what we wanted to share today is highlights of a report that the Minnesota Network commissioned last year, and it's a statewide report on Minnesota demographics, and it's been very, very clear how they have been changing. If we go to the next slide, we will see that this is not only something that's happening in Minnesota, but is actually what's going on in the United States. It's a seismic change in demographics, and brands, organizations, movements like the credit union movement need to actually pay attention to this. This is the population of the United States as of December of 2020. And large, vast country that spans over the North American continent, 329 million people. If we go to the next slide, we will see that 40% or 133 million are people who identify or consider multicultural, meaning that their racial ethnic background comes from more than one race or ethnicity. So it's important to know that the United States is growing not only diverse in terms of people, but every generation that has come, one after another, is more diverse than the one before. So in real terms, what that means for brands, organizations, and ultimately credit unions is that, in order to appeal to a multicultural market, we actually need to have that diversity in every level of decision making, every level of power, board, C-suite, middle management, and front lines, so that we are relevant to the diverse multicultural markets that we have. So one of the things that I just wanted to say right before I introduce Jennifer Esperanza is that credit unions are here to do essentially two things. First, financial inclusion, work very hard in making sure that we don't leave consumer behind out of the mainstream financial and retail banking, if we want to go that way. So it's financial inclusion for all, but then also that relationship with the credit union should result in financial health and well-being for all. And when I say for all, I really need to qualify this and, it's stress that credit unions are hyper-local organizations that really need to look after those that the financial system is leaving behind. So this is why, part of our commitment and our work with the Minnesota Credit Union Network has been just to show, this, this reality and really bring back credit unions into why they're here. They're here for financial inclusion and for financial well-being. And with that, introduction, I would like to call my colleague, Dr. Jennifer Esperanza, who commissioned it, who actually worked deeply in this study. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Victor. I was really happy to conduct this multicultural study for the state of Minnesota, particularly because of the points that Victor had raised. This is a growing population, both nationally, but also at the state level. And we really wanted to get a sense of to what extent was multicultural growth happening for the state of Minnesota, and what are some ways that we can best prepare for serving this more diverse, multicultural, younger population. And so, with any business model, you want to do some kind of market research to be able to understand your demographics and see what the potentials are. So we were happy to collaborate with the Minnesota Credit Union Network as well as Claritas on providing data for credit unions to best strategize products and services for their diversifying um, field of membership. Now, if we take a look at the current population ratios, we find that still, you know, the majority of Minnesota's population is still white, people of European descent, particularly of Swedish, Norwegian, Anglo, German, um, Irish, and Italian descent. But we also see that this is also changing, this demographic, especially if we disaggregate this data down to age. We find that a younger population is actually more diverse, and the aging population is largely white. And so, what does this mean? Let's break down these numbers a little bit more. Aside from that 78% white, we find that 8% are Black, African American, 6% Asian, 6% Hispanic, and then 2% other. And this can be people who are identify as multiracial. Some highlights. There's a lot of numbers I'm throwing at you, and as a good social scientist, we want to be able to look at the data, we look at the numbers, but for the sake of brevity, I wanted to just highlight some ways in which we're looking at population growth. What we're finding in the state of Minnesota is that the white population has grown by 4%, and if you contrast that with the other ethnic groups, you'll find that the black population, which is both African Americans as well as people of African descent from the continent, as well as the Caribbean and Latin America, they have actually grown by almost 138%. So that is a really large growth rate. The same with the Asian population, it's by 117%. The Hispanic population has grown 136%. And you can see the projections all the way up to the year 2026. The population will be growing, but most dramatically among minority groups, non-white. For example, over 35% of Blacks and Hispanics are under 18 years of age versus only 20% for whites in the same age range. One of the things we like to point out as consultants for the credit union industry is that we'd like credit unions to consider the different products and services for people, particularly at this early stage of their lives. Once they hit 18, adulthood, all the way up to about 40 years of age. What are the opportunities for credit unions to be able to target this demographic? And you see that in just a few years, you'll find that people will be looking for first time auto loans, getting into their first mortgages, savings accounts, and so forth. And we want to be prepared, if we aren't already, for this increasingly young and multicultural population. So, what we mean by this is that we want to provide a more robust set of financial services for this younger, more multicultural populace. And this is what we found throughout the state of Minnesota. It wasn't just for the Twin Cities. Surprisingly, we found that there was a large growth rate among Hispanics and Blacks in the state of Minnesota, even in small towns and rural areas. And we suspect this is largely because of employers in these areas, particularly in the agricultural and food processing industry that are located in these areas throughout the state. Once these groups have settled into their communities, they've also had their children settle into the school districts. They've found that they've built community in these areas. So the changing demographics of the United States are such that they are no longer just urban, but they're also rural. Members will require products and services that not only attend to their financial needs, but they're also culturally relevant. We have to consider the fact that just like generations before, when German, Swedish, Norwegian, Italian migrants had moved into the state of Minnesota, they had very specific cultural financial needs. The same thing for the Hmong population, Somalis, um, people coming from Syria, Afghanistan. There are very culturally specific kinds of products and services that have to do with their cultural practices, with religion, and so forth. And we want to make sure that historically underrepresented groups can benefit from financial inclusion programs that address the fact that we have narrowing wealth gaps and building credit for these minority populations. These are populations that are just first or second generation in the United States, or for the African American population, there are many gains that need to be made in order to close the wealth gap. We want to be able to champion their efforts in being able to build that safety net for not just themselves, but for their generations to come. For example, we find that among Hispanics with the largest population gains, we're finding more Hispanics coming from Mexico and Puerto Rico for the state of Minnesota. These were the two largest groups here. And for Asians, the nationalities with the largest population gains were coming from Southeast Asia, historically among the Hmong population. And the second group with the largest population gains since 2000 are Chinese and Taiwanese. Africans in Minnesota, so these are those groups who are not African American, but the Black nationalities that were born within a generation, just a generation or two, in countries outside of North America. So we find that the largest population gains for Black nationalities since 2000 were from Somalia, and also those who self-described as generic African. And African can serve as a generic category that can encompass individuals who may or may not have specified their country of origin. There are a lot of countries that were war torn, that they may not even exist at all. And so this is kind of a catch-all category. It also are folks who are maybe coming from the Caribbean or from different generations. We want to look at the robustness of financial services. For example, we took a look at zip codes, for example, 55101 in St. Paul. We see that, there's a healthy amount of banks and credit unions. And yet, doing a deeper dive, the data shows that there's still some financial deserts within, let's say, the Twin Cities. We're taking a look at areas in which there's a lack of access for either banks or credit unions in relation to the number of check cashing and money service outlets. And what we find is that, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Duluth, St. Cloud have various financial deserts, and we need to be able to find ways to provide a robust set of checking and savings loans accounts for populations in these zip codes. In contrast to the St. Paul area maps that I showed you, a financial desert, a sample of that is in the zip code of 55407 in Minneapolis. And you can see in this area, there are very few banks or credit unions. You can see them in red in this area here. And not surprisingly, this is a financial desert. It is a historically African American neighborhood, and the Cup Foods here that is in the dead center of this map. This is actually the location in which George Floyd was murdered in the year 2000, and you can see, this would be considered a financial desert. It's important to understand that this is a place where, the Cup Foods in this middle of this financial desert actually served as a place for people to get some kind of financial services done. There were, you can get cell phones, you could, buy cigarettes and produce. Many of the customers were known on a first name basis. And yet at the same time, there was a heavy, police surveillance in this area. And, there were ways in which there was mistrust, with community members. We want to be able to find other ways for community members to trust in organizations, institutions that establish themselves in this area. And so we want to be able to promote financial well-being by opening up branches and doing more outreach in those financial deserts. Locate them in your area and seek partnerships with nonprofits such as the Minneapolis Foundation or the Center for Economic Inclusion. And so these have a long history of economic development for their folks. Find ways to partner with local businesses in these financial deserts, perhaps to provide banking services and financial literacy opportunities. And look to the credit union industry organizations and resources such as the Credit Union DEI Collective, Juntos Avanzamos, AACUC, and other organizations that are out there for best practices and fruitful partnerships. There's a lot of potential for diverse populations out there. They are very entrepreneurial, lots of opportunities, and we want to be able to make sure that we grow our credit unions organically and fit the needs of what these populations are in need of. Thank you. And Victor, I don't know if you have any other, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that we have offered this partnership and all this data really with the Minnesota Credit Union Network, so that data brings out that curiosity that needs to be there, and hopefully this would lead into a solid plan and strategy for organic growth and a service and outreach to populations that maybe not be your typical or legacy communities, but understand that credit unions really have that mission of including everyone into financial services, bringing about financial health and inclusion. But the only way that this would happen is if we have a plan, use the data, and put resources behind it. So, we really acknowledge the Minnesota Credit Union Network for acting on this and really advocating for action. Thanks, Jen, for
Sure.
all the information.
Jennifer and Victor, thanks for the data there. Just a couple of follow-up questions on the
Sure.
Coopera report. You talk about the areas that are deserts. Do we know if there are certain products or ways in which to engage communities that either don't trust or have had different relationships with financial services or financial institutions in the past, or different products based on ethnicity or the changing demographics, that really would offer a way for credit unions and the community to work together to, build economic equity?
So we can infer as first that communities of color that have been marginalized and financially underserved, and frankly not served by banks or credit unions, probably the very first things that they need is to build their credit, to to establish a credit report, to even open an account. And there exist a lot of barriers for a lot of these communities to even open an account at a financial institution. So it's really good to do an audit, an equity audit internally, and see if we have those things. At least the very first thing that presents to be an obstacle or a barrier to opening an account. If we cannot open an account at a credit union, then that relationship does not exist. And so, we usually like the action bias to go and solve the problem, but really what we really need to know is the root cause of it. If the person cannot connect to the financial system, then they will remain unbanked. And so that's the first thing that I could offer.
Yeah, and one thing to piggyback off of that is that for these communities of color, it's not unusual for them to have that entrepreneurial spirit that I had mentioned earlier.
Mhm.
So, a secondary income stream or multiple income streams. What might a credit union offer in terms of small business loans? Developing their online apps, their phone apps, so that it makes these kinds of transactions, these financial transactions, easier for folks to be able to pay their vendors or to pay anybody who may be working for them. These are examples of that.
And credit unions need to be intentional in reaching out to the consumer in these communities that they may not know, because it's not build it and they will come. Actually, you really need to establish trust A lot of
Absolutely.
this consumers may mistrust financial institutions for a number of reasons, and so partnering with NGOs in the community or non-governmental organizations or community-based organizations that actually work with these communities is paramount for the credit union.
Yeah, we're going to have 4 examples of how Minnesota credit unions are working within communities across the state. One of the things I thought as we wrap here that you brought up that's really, I think, notable, and one of the things we need to highlight when we're talking about economic equity across the state is that this isn't just a opportunity for credit unions and for citizens and non-citizens in the metro area. This is an opportunity across the state. Briefly, are there
Absolutely.
any kind of highlights from greater Minnesota where diverse populations have begun to grow, where you've found that, connecting with credit unions has found, a good relationship builder for both sides?
Absolutely. One example is I recently had done a training for Fulda Area Credit Union, and I was particularly impressed with the diversity of their staff and the really thoughtful questions that they raised in terms of what might it look like to serve the very diverse membership bases. If you don't share the same language, what are some ways that we could do better outreach? And so I really love the fact that credit unions have become aware of the diversity of their field of membership, as well as the diversity of their own staff, and are working to basically develop a culture of inclusion, both internally and externally. We're finding that they're asking questions to be able to be ready to serve their members in a really respectful way.
Jennifer Esperanza, Victor Cora, thanks for joining us on this briefing about economic equity in Minnesota for Financial Wellbeing Month, presented by Minnesota's credit unions. We'll continue to refer to your report and distribute it about Minnesota's opportunities presented by the credit unions. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
the invitation.
Thanks.
Jennifer mentioned Fulda Credit Union. We're going to talk to Fulda and 3 other credit unions about how they are doing community outreach, what products, what services, and what opportunities there are when we return on this briefing about economic equity as part of Financial Wellbeing Month, presented by Minnesota's credit unions. Welcome back to the Economic Equity Forum presented by Minnesota's credit unions. Now we're going to talk to 4 separate credit unions about their initiatives around economic equity and building economic equity here in Minnesota. The first credit union we're going to talk to is Fulda Area Credit Union, and Chad Merrihew is my guest. Chad, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. It's an honor.
Well, I know that Fulda Area Credit Union, which serves southwestern Minnesota and the area around there, has really kind of taken some pretty impressive initiative in building membership amongst the multicultural market. Can you share why that came about and how it came about for Fulda Area Credit Union?
Sure. First and foremost, it's our mission to serve and better serve the communities. Our mission statement is being the trusted financial cooperative on providing exceptional products and services to better the communities and our members. So that's at the core foundation of why we're doing things. Strategically, Nobles County, which is where our largest branches and the majority of our membership resides, is extremely diverse. Worthington, the largest city in Nobles County, has over 40% Hispanic population, and that's 54% of my members live or work in Nobles County.
Well, that makes sense. And as we heard from Coopera before, Minnesota's changing demographics aren't just isolated to the Twin Cities. So when you talk about that level of percentage of, population being Hispanic in the Worthington, Nobles County area, what are the specific ways in which those members or your community, engages, or what products and services have you found that, new immigrants and others need, to provide financial services?
First and foremost is education. Those that come here maybe from outside of the country don't have the concept or the full understanding of the American banking system, and really don't know what a credit union is or how we as credit unions differ from the community banks. A lot of the community banks shy away from serving all members of the community, and they're more focused on serving higher net worth members or well-established members. We here at the credit union, we take a very broad but strategic approach to serving the communities. For example, in February, we conducted staff training, had Coopera assist with helping and identify cultural differences and to allow us as employees and as the financial institutions to better serve the members, understanding them and why they may or may not react to certain financial products or certain pieces of information. We serve, the largely Hispanic population here in Southwest Minnesota. 4 of our 5 branches have bilingual staff, and over 35% of our staff are bilingual and speak at least 2 languages.
I mean, I think that goes to show that if you can't communicate, it's really hard to engage those members. Has that engagement led to other community members, other Spanish-speaking individuals, feeling more comfortable after you've, put these initiatives in place?
It has. We've seen tremendous growth in the Hispanic market here in Worthington for our real estate portfolio, our consumer portfolio, and the deposits. We have a branch located in the JBS pork processing facility where we do bilingual orientation for new employees. So we're getting in front of the employees and teaching them what a credit union is and what are the benefits of it being involved here at the credit union. And we offer bilingual and available access throughout different delivery channels. For example, our website is bilingual. Our telephone banking is bilingual. We're getting ready to launch our mobile and online banking platform, transition that to a bilingual option. Our literature is bilingual as well.
Chad Marihu from Fulda Area Credit Union, thanks for joining us on this Building Economic Equity briefing from Minnesota Credit Unions.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Joining me now is Lisette Kamai Legrand from First Alliance Credit Union. First Alliance is in southeastern Minnesota, and they too have had specific initiatives related to building community and building connections to community in a diverse population. Lisette, thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me, Blois. I appreciate it.
So one of the things that I know First Alliance has done is a collaboration with the Intercultural Mutual Assistance Association. Can you talk about that collaboration and why First Alliance found that it was a good idea?
Yeah, so we've had a partnership with IMAA for many years, but over the last 2 years, our partnership grew because we created a broadband access fund for the community. So during the pandemic, we realized that there was a lot of underserved communities, especially refugee and immigrant communities, who just didn't have access to broadband. So the credit union started the fund, and we're helping to assist community members have access to the internet. So for school, healthcare, work, all of those things that they need. So we've been adding to that fund over the last 2 years, and we're helping over 100 families in our community today with access to broadband.
Wow, that's impressive, especially over the last 2 years. Everybody has really understood how connections online, the online world has been necessary. Talk about in Rochester and the area, just the internal measures around inclusivity, or how you've engaged new community members or new immigrants to understand the products and services of First Alliance.
Sure. So in partnership with IMAA, a lot of what we do is financial literacy, not just for those families, that are in the broadband program, but across the community. So we're doing a lot of financial literacy efforts in tandem with IMAA. And so with that comes a lot of community members who are looking for new accounts, who are looking for mainstream banking services. So we've been able to make those connections across the community. And we too have bilingual employees. We use what's called a language line, where we can set up interpreters who will come in for appointments with members, and they speak multiple languages. We've also been able to really provide assistance to the Afghan refugees who have come to Southeast Minnesota. There's quite a few that are in Southeast Minnesota and Wisconsin. They're looking for financial services, so we're able to provide that as well. Many of them do speak English, which is helpful, but again, we also have the interpretive services if it's necessary when we're opening accounts.
Well, I mean, I think that's it is needed, because you can imagine coming to America, coming to a new community and not understanding the banking system or having people speak the language. Obviously, Rochester area, southeastern Minnesota is growing in diversity. Are there certain ways in which you've found employees to help engage that, or internally worked with employees to understand these communities?
Absolutely. So we've started our DEI committee, our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, and it's a cross-section across the organization. And some of the things we're doing are we're bringing speakers in monthly from all areas of the community, whether it be LGBTQ plus, Afghan refugees, members of, we have, speakers from Mexico, just all everywhere. And we're learning about the culture, we're learning about banking. And it's really helping us to develop those relationships, because we're learning cultural norms and different things, how people view the banking system, which is really good. And what's grown from that is we were recently asked to join Rise for Youth, which is a partnership between the NAACP and Mayo Clinic. And it's to provide career pathing, financial education for students from all walks of life who may not necessarily have access to the opportunities that others have. So we'll be participating in that this June with approximately 40 students. And the great part about that is they're learning about careers outside of healthcare. So they can learn about, accounting and human resources and all of those different things, and banking as well. So we're really excited for that partnership as well.
Sounds great. Lisette Comag-Legrand from First Alliance, thanks for joining me on this briefing about economic equity and building it here in Minnesota.
Thanks, boys.
Up next, and joining me now, is Brian Volkman from Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union. Affinity Plus is really taking the leadership in new citizen accounts, partnering with the city of St. Paul, and making sure that new products and services are available for new residents of Minnesota. Brian, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Blaise.
Brian, can you talk about the New American Loan Program and the partnership with the city of St. Paul and how it came about?
Yeah, so the New American Loan Program is for residents of the city of St. Paul, and we had been having conversations with the city of St. Paul and others, and looking for ways that we could help underserved communities in Minnesota, where we are primarily focused. And the city of St. Paul and us, we met and we're discussing a New American Loan Program. There's a few different options kind of throughout the U.S. There's other credit unions that are doing it in Seattle and some other areas. And so we looked at that and said, hey, we think that there's an opportunity for us to partner with the city of St. Paul to offer a loan product to help people pay the fees to become a citizen. It was pretty surprising at how expensive it was to become a citizen. It was up to $2,000. So our loan product is actually up to $2,000 to be able to help people become a citizen in there. And so our loan it's a no interest loan up to $2,000, no interest. There's a fee up front of $75. And once the loan is paid in full, the member gets $50 back. And so we really looked at, the underwriting criteria for somebody who's maybe lives in Minnesota, but isn't a citizen yet. So we had to look at, making sure that we were inclusive in our underwriting to be able to help people become a citizen. And I think the partnership with the city of St. Paul has been fantastic. They were able to provide us advice. And, I heard the last speaker talk about the language line. That's something that was really important, that we had a lot of the languages covered that maybe weren't, that maybe we didn't have with staff. And so language line and some of those other things were really important. So far, we had to, our St. Paul branches, we did training. It is limited to St. Paul and residents of St. Paul. And so we have trained our staff, and we're also partnering with the city of St. Paul on different events that they're doing, where we'll have staff show up and help provide advice and guidance and things like that. So it's been, so far, it's I think the partnership with the city of St. Paul's been great, and we look forward to growing this.
Well, Brian, I think that's interesting because we've been talking a lot today about new Minnesotans, the products and services they need, some of the economic hurdles they may face to build equity, but just the cost to become a citizen probably isn't something that most people would think about. And, when you're thinking about food and housing and kids and education, and then, where does that becoming a citizen cost, come in your priorities, when in reality, that's ultimately, the pathway that gives them economic opportunity. So it seems like that's a great first step. As you talked about language and we think about those kind of opportunities, I know Affinity Plus has had, bilingual services for quite a while amongst the Hmong community, Hispanic community, et cetera. But one of the other areas that we think about, or maybe we take for granted, is digital banking and digital accounts. When a lot of immigrant population, they don't have a desktop computer. Their main source of technology is their phone. And I understand that you guys have launched a product called Bank Dora, which is a digital-only initiative or product based on phones, no fees, fee-free ATMs, kind of like other, products and services that people would maybe hear about, but they're unique to new immigrants or kind of the growing diverse population of Minnesota.
Yeah, so Dora is really, the way that we look at it is, it's the first kind of neobank strategy that credit unions kind of have come together and launched. And US Alliance was kind of the credit union that initially developed Dora, and then came to the market and said, hey, we're looking for other credit unions to partner with to kind of bring this out there. So in September, a credit union service organization was formed with Affinity Plus, Service Credit Union, Digital Credit Union, and US Alliance to really say, okay, what's next for Dora? So Dora is an app that you can download and get access to get access to a debit card with you can do bill pay and also check deposit. Mm-hmm. And so it's been so far pretty good. Excuse me.
No problem. We all have that issue, especially when we talk too much.
Excuse me. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah, so we launched it in September, and we've had some great discussions around the 50 million Americans who are underbanked and unbanked and have a lack of access, but also a trust issue with financial institutions. And so we're trying to not only bridge the gap of access by removing some of the traditional barriers to like a bank account with a debit card, like check systems. We don't pull check systems. We don't have credit, some of those traditional things that are barriers to getting access to an account. And so, so far it's been really, really positive. There's a lot of excitement in the industry about this, a lot of intrigue from other credit unions at how they want to be a part of it. And we're super think that this is an excellent opportunity to help more people. And I think, sometimes the question that we get asked often is, well, why Dora? Why isn't that a competitor to your credit union? And I think one of the things that we talked a lot about is Dora is for members that probably aren't coming into our branch today. This
Yeah.
is an area of members and potential members in the long run where we think that we can reach them without maybe having a physical branch, a physical location, but yet access to a really strong account that is set up to help them be successful. And as you mentioned, the no overdraft fees, that's a big piece of this as well.
Well, Brian, I think that's important because we heard from Coopera about these financial deserts too, where there aren't branches. And so we all know in the virtual and digital world that you may not have a physical building to go to, but if you have a product and a service that begins that relationship based in community with credit union, that it can be a powerful tool.
Yeah, exactly.
Brian Volkman from Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union, thanks for joining me on this briefing.
Thanks, Blaise.
Joining me now and final as part of this segment is Deborah Hurston. She's with the Association for Black Economic Power. She's at the center and leading the way to build a credit union called Village Financial Credit Union in North Minneapolis. Deborah, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Deborah, we've talked about Village in the past. There's been some news stories about Village Financial Credit Union. Talk about the goal of building a credit union and what that would mean to the community of North Minneapolis.
Well, absolutely. For those who may not be aware, North Minneapolis is a community that's riddled with payday lenders. The community came together and decided that to address the economic inequities that they face as a result of the payday lenders, they wanted to establish a credit union. And so they created an organization, the Association for Black Economic Power, and asked that organization to literally give birth to a credit union, Village Financial Credit Union. What that means is that not only North Minneapolis, but Hennepin and Ramsey County will have a credit union that is designed to address a whole potpourri of needs. It will be a source of pride for the residents of North Minneapolis and beyond. The residents right now don't have access to a financial home. And so this credit union will give them that access.
Well, and I think that financial home, and one of the things we heard from Coopera about kind of these financial deserts or places where the payday lender is the financial services. And we know that there's a lot of, fees and it's not as friendly. In some ways it's predatory at times. So it's not just about access there, but it's also the credit union model of community ownership and things like that. And I know you've been talking to a lot of people, you've been soliciting support, building financial support and kind of a base here. Deborah, as you've gone through that process, what do you hear from people about, why they believe that Village Financial Credit Union is worth investing in and worth putting, kind of their money where their mouth is when it comes to the future?
Well, I'd say the biggest thing that I'm hearing is that there is a need. And while there are a segment of the population is unbanked and there's a segment that's underbanked, there's a huge chunk who want to engage, but there's no facility in North Minneapolis for them to engage.
Yeah.
And so the need is clearly there. The fact that they're using payday lenders might be a result of the fact of a void in the area. And so for some people, when you are working a full-time job, but you hit what could be considered a minor catastrophe, like a tire, there's no bridge to get to get support for that minor catastrophe, if you will, other than going to a payday lender. And once you walk into that lane, once you walk into that door, you're in this never-ending cycle of debt that you simply have no way of coming out of. What credit unions can do is offer you an opportunity to address that minor catastrophe and still live and make ends meet at the exact same time. Whereas payday lenders keep you in that cycle. And so credit unions offer opportunities to succeed. Credit unions offer a means to get you to your end goal. Credit unions offer you support. And that's what Village is all about. Village is a place where people can come in and they will see that they are at home, and people there are all about helping them move from A to B to C to D and beyond with regard to their overall financial growth. That is what Village is about. And what people need to understand is that when we all do well, we all do well.
Absolutely, Deborah. And this forum is about building economic equity. And, with all due respect, you can't build equity if you're continually paying fees or you're using payday lenders, but rather you have to buy a house or you have to own a business, and you have to build that wealth through a vehicle, which is much more traditional financial services with maybe the community approach of the Village Financial Credit Union. When can people expect Village to be up and operating, or what's your goal for how and when Village is part of the community physically and financially?
I have to describe it as a fluid timeline because there are a lot of different twists and turns. But the goal is the end of the second quarter of this year, maybe the first part of the third quarter, we will be submitting the application at the state and federal level. We're hoping to have a soft launch at the end of this year, the end of this calendar year, or the beginning of 23. And by soft launch, I mean we'll come out with a strong online presence and slowly move into a brick and mortar.
Great. Deborah Hurston, the Association of Black Economic Power in North Minneapolis, building Village Financial Credit Union. Thanks for joining me on this Fluence
Thank
Forum
you for having me.
with Minnesota's credit unions. When we come back, we're going to talk to Representative Esther Agbaje about legislation and the importance of building economic power. If you're interested in these topics and learning more, you should visit workingforminnesota.org. That's where you'll see many, many stories about how credit unions are working for Minnesota. I'm Blois Olson, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the final segment of the forum here, presented by Minnesota's credit unions on economic equity, building economic equity for Minnesota, presented by Minnesota's credit unions. I'm Blois Olson, your host. Joining me now is Representative Esther Agbaje. Representative, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me here. I'm very glad to be here.
There is a lot of talk about equity. There has been a lot of talk about equity. Today, we're focused on economic equity and some of the public initiatives around economic equity. And you have a bill. It also has a Senate companion about first-generation home buyers. Can you talk about why ownership of homes is so important to kind of shift this conversation about financial equity and to provide that opportunity?
Sure. Well, thanks so much for bringing up that bill. I really look at it as in the United States, we have seen that ownership, usually of land, property, a business, is the key foundation to generational wealth. And so one of the easiest ways to do that is through home ownership. But we know that in America's history as well, there's also been a lack of home ownership in communities of color, primarily because of what the federal government has done in the past of redlining, racial covenants that prevented people of color, particularly Black people, from owning a home. So I think a lot of these programs that are now starting to come up now are working to sort of rectify that situation by ensuring that people who probably have never owned a home before, maybe none of their family members have owned a home before, but they have access to the capital that it takes to apply for a home and be able to meet that down payment assistance. So that's what this bill is looking to do.
Got it. And, the numbers show that we're currently fifth in having the largest disparity in the nation between home ownership or property ownership and generational wealth. The bill projects that up to 5,000 people could become first-generation home buyers which would move that needle. And then if that happened, we'd be 11th. When you talk to people, I mean, I know that it feels simple and sounds simple to have the money for a down payment. But as we know, it's also that sustaining income to pay the mortgage, et cetera. Are there any other barriers that you know of that we can remove or that this bill can address to make the process maybe less intimidating or less complicated?
Well, part of what this bill also does is it also provides a financial resource educational course along with the down payment assistance. So I think that will be really helpful, particularly for first-time home buyers. Some of the other things you mentioned, though, are really going to have to be addressed through other bills or other means. We do know one thing is that a lot of people who are currently renting do make enough money to pay for a mortgage. What they don't have is the upfront lump sum cost to pay for a down payment. So we're hoping that a bill like this allows them to overcome that hurdle, but they would still be able to pay their mortgages. In terms of other areas, I really do think we have to start thinking about what other areas of economic equity can we be looking at in terms of wages, job security, ensuring that people are in a position where they can advance their professional goals and careers, but that's also commensurate with appropriate compensation.
Representative Agbaje is my guest. We're talking about economic equity opportunity here as part of April being Financial Wellbeing Month. As you're in the community and you talk to new citizens, new residents of our communities, the financial system in the United States is oftentimes different than it is maybe where they came from or the way in which they've dealt with finances before. Have you found ways in which that education piece or that relationship piece can be expedited or changed when you talk to, constituents or residents of your community?
I think, the people who are the experts in this education piece probably have the best pulse on the issue. But one thing that does come up is, people already have a sense of their finances. They already have a sense of how much they're bringing in and what their expenses are. But what they probably really need the most help with is someone to kind of help guide them reach their own goals. So I'm, glad to see, credit unions kind of partner with community organizations to be able to make sure that that financial education is there in a way that's not, simply just the basics, but also helping people kind of level up to what they want to do next.
Representative Agbaje, thanks for joining me today on this briefing. Again, this has been a briefing about building economic equity as part of April being Financial Wellbeing Month, presented by Minnesota's credit unions. It's really important that as we talk about all of these issues, that finances be at the cornerstone to make sure Minnesota is prepared for changing demographics, for our economy to continue to grow and move forward, and so that people understand that relationships with institutions like credit unions can be creative and different than traditional means by different products that you heard about, by legislation you heard about, and just understanding how Minnesota is changing. I'm Blois Olson. I've been your host. To learn more, visit minnesotacreditunions.org. Thank you.